It's not supposed to be the real world.
Welcome back to Perpetual Jank Machine, the only podcast at a time. I'm John.
I'm Miles.
So today we're going to talk about, I guess, the foundation of a lot of programmers' career experiences, and that is when they went to college and they got their education in computer science. Some people may have started before this, but I think this is the point where a lot of people really start to cut their teeth on programming and stay up all night and, really cry out a good couple of cries per program they write. And whether or not that experience is in line with what is expected of a modern programmer or expected of people who get one of those degrees and go on to different fields. So I think that we probably have some differing opinions on this. So I will start off with asking you, if you were to sum up your formative experience in computer science in one sentence, how would you put it?
It was too much work.
Too much work. Okay.
Too much work. Because that's like my own opinion, but yeah, too much work. Because they stuck you with so much stuff. Oh my gosh! Like every class had a project. It was like some massive project or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that helped you in what you're doing as a professional, or do you feel like it was unnecessary in a way, and is that why it was too much?
I kind of get it because they have a lot of material to go over in a short amount of time, but also it's not like realistic for like a real world job. Like most jobs, they don't want to pay you, if you're doing hourly work, they don't want to pay you for like doing a whole bunch of extra work. Like they only want you to work 9 to 5. They're not expecting you to stay up all night or do something like that.
This is true, but do you feel like the subject matter was helpful, or do you feel like it was mainly just the timing that was a problem?
I think the subject matter was good because, see, I didn't know any computer science stuff going into college. I literally just decided I was going to do computer science from like, whenever you're in high school, you're like, oh, what am I going to do with my life? And everyone like stresses out about it so much. And I was like, this choice doesn't actually matter. I'm just going to pick something. I have no idea, and hopefully it'll work out. So then I picked computer science, and I ended up liking it. So I was pretty happy with that.
Definitely a good outcome for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely did equip me in the sense that it gave me a broad knowledge of a variety of different skills, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's impossible for you to teach someone exactly what they need for the current job market, because by the time they graduate, the job market has changed at least a little bit, especially with like the technology companies like to use. They're always hopping from one thing to the next just because someone tells them, oh, like, this is the future. And then they feel like they have to get on board with like some new system or some new technology. So I don't really think in 4 years they could have gotten you all the way from like, oh, like, here are the hot new tools. And then you get out of college and then you learn that no one's using those things anymore. So I think it's a much better approach to teach, a whole bunch of general knowledge, like how everything works under the hood. And then you can usually figure it out on the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do want to get back a little bit to the time thing a little bit later, but just to probe a bit further on the content, do you feel like, I know that a big criticism from a lot of people about collegiate education, about computer science, is that it's very focused on fundamentals that are not as important in, I would say, the vast majority of jobs that people are realistically going to get with a computer science bachelor's. Obviously, if you're going into research, it's different, but a lot of it is very heavy on math and proofs and performance and optimization a lot of the time.
Oh, I get what you're saying. I like doing that stuff, though.
I do too. I really enjoyed having that kind of a concentration.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that in some sense because I didn't learn anything about networking. How the hell did I not learn anything about networking during a 4-year time at college?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that, definitely, at least with our school. I don't know about anybody else, other schools. I do feel like they definitely left out some important skills, but there's a lot to go over in like 4 years. And I think the fundamentals are very important, and I feel like a lot of people complain about them way more than they should. I think it trains you how to think in the correct way to solve problems that you haven't come across before, and to do so in like a good way. That being said, they might hit it a bit too much, and might neglect some basic skills that maybe they don't think are important, but are still like very important. Like once again, networking.
Mm-hmm. It kind of feels similar, especially in that there is a lot of the math that actually does transfer over into your everyday work as a programmer who's just banging tickets every day. More so than I think a lot of people really appreciate. One of my big anecdotes is I remember they used to teach us set theory like 6 times over the course of undergrad.
I didn't even
learn it in
realize
your
it was
intro
set
course.
theory. Oh my gosh. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, like you learn it in your intro course. You learn it in your math courses. You learn it in numerical analysis. You learn it in logic. You learn it in programming languages. You learn it in computation theory. And by the 5th or 6th time, you're like, okay, they are clearly not talking to each other about the the curriculum of their courses, because I don't need to learn this for the 6th time. But
I feel like literally every class has gone over how to convert binary to decimal at least once.
And then like I'm thinking this is ridiculous. I know how to do a set union, for the love of God, and so does everybody else in this room. But then you write your first CRUD app and you realize that a lot of it is just all of these data aggregates that you're dealing with. All these objects are just sets of keys, and they might have a value riding along with that.
Yeah.
And when you look at a lot of the enterprise code that has been written, you would be absolutely aghast at how thoroughly that is disregarded. And how many times you see 80 lines of code that could just be represented as the difference of a set or something like that. Or like the difference between a union, an intersection, and maybe an exclusive OR.
I think the reason why people think they don't need to learn what they learn is by the time they do learn it, it feels second nature enough. And then they feel like, oh, I never even needed to know this. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, even just pointers. When I was learning pointers, oh my gosh, I could not wrap my brain around that for like the life of me. But nowadays, like I'm just like, if someone asked me like, oh, how do you use pointers? I wouldn't even be able to like tell them how it works. Like it feels so second nature to the point where it feels like I don't even know how to like do it. I wouldn't know how to program like, without pointers. It just wouldn't really make sense to me.
Well, you could pass everything by value, but then your program would take 1,000,000 years to run.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And whenever you're dealing with small programs and you're just learning programming, that concept's so hard for you to like get your brain around because everything feels so new. If you get into like the enterprise and you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I wish they would have spent less time teaching me how to do pointers and more time like, teaching me how to network or something like that. But like, you don't realize that you're using like pointers all the time, in your work. Not necessarily pointers, but at least the concepts behind them.
Yeah.
You're aware of it. And, the fact that, you look back on it and you're like, oh, I didn't need to know that. I already know how to do it so well. But it's like you only know how to do it so well because they spent so much time on it.
Yeah. And a lot of that is carried forward into more advanced language concepts. Like every time I pick up a runtime that I'm not familiar with, within like maybe 2 hours of me working with it, I always wind up asking a question like, are all strings interned in this runtime? Because if not, then we might have a performance problem here.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's just so illuminating when you are familiar with that and when you're able to prove out certain characteristics of your programs. It just makes your life so much easier.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people are also they think that perhaps the base that they are given is not particularly useful. But some people also think that maybe they should be taught more. And I think this might be a good lead-in to speaking about, I guess, the time that it takes to get this kind of an education. So the big thing that everybody talks about is that they never learn Git in university, or if they do, they had to take like a special course that taught them how to Git, and it was 1 credit, and it was with the cool professor.
Really?
Yeah. So many people that I know, they have 4-year degrees, and they just don't know how to rebase, or they don't know how to squash something, or they don't know how to cherry pick. They might know how to commit and how to push, but that's pretty much it.
Oh, I have no idea what you just said, so I might be in that group.
It's like, as soon as you ask them to do something other than commit, pull, push, they're like, oh dear. Or like resolve a merge request on GitHub or a GitHub interface.
Yeah. I mean, they taught me some basics Git. I remember a class where they taught me regex, and I thought that was so weird because the class had nothing to do with regex. I think they went over Git, file systems, regular expressions in that class. I can't even remember what it was.
That sounds a lot more practical than where I guess I covered it in my curriculum.
Yeah, and it was one of the required courses, so I'm surprised that other people don't share that experience.
Every time I find somebody who's a little bit on the greener end of things, who might be fresh out of college, I mean, rebasing is itself kind of I feel like your tooling is a better way to learn it than, I guess, thinking about branches and sitting down in a lecture. So that might be one of the reasons they don't do it there. But I just always get complaints about like, oh, why didn't they tell me what dependency injection is? Or why didn't they tell me about Git? Or why didn't they tell me about how to use asynchrony? And I guess a lot of that boils down to like what is worth the time and what is worth the money. I'm not sure how you might feel about that, but I guess this leads into the question of time. I know that you thought that it was probably a bit much, and that's understandable as somebody who came into it without, a lot of prior experience.
Oh, screw off.
I mean, okay, I came into it with a lot of prior experience, and I felt like, especially in the beginning, it was not that bad.
There's no I'm struggling.
It got hard toward the end. It absolutely did get hard toward the end, and I struggled, and I had a couple of good cries on different assignments as well. But
no, the end was No, I'm just kidding. No, the end was hard too. It was all hard for me. Oh my gosh.
Like I'd imagine, like for me, it was a nice steady ramp up, and I'd imagine for a lot of the people, and I think this is true of a lot of people who went into fields that they didn't have prior experience with. Like I'm sure that everybody in freshman chemistry would feel that they also hit a wall when they hit college. So
I mean, maybe, but I don't think it's quite the same, because you hear about people who have been like programming, like, since like, I don't know, they first got into like middle school or something like that. Whereas you don't meet someone who's been engineering before college. Like that's not a thing.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that your experience might be more similar to those who are going into different fields, which don't have as strong of like a hobby culture.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay.
Like you're hitting the same wall that the civil engineers are hitting, that the physics guys are hitting, presumably some of the math guys are hitting. I'm sure that there's some math guys that also have the on-ramp there because they've been listening to 3 Blue 1 Brown since they were 2.
No, it is a good
but
channel.
It is a good channel. Love that channel. But I guess from your perspective, when it comes to the time, do you feel like it was an issue of, I guess, too high of a rate, or should it have taken longer, or how could that be improved?
Okay, now that one's hard. All I know it was too much. The amount of things they want you to, like, basically the size of the projects. Because a lot of the classes, is project-based. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I get that they want to teach you a lot of different concepts, but they really want you to code, I think, too much from scratch. And they don't realize that, like, you might run into a bug which takes you like 3 hours, and you might not have run into and that bug might have literally nothing to do with the project. Like, it's just you setting up the systems involved. Like the project might be on, I don't know, like strings or something like that. But here you're like still trying to figure out print statements. For some reason your print statement's like bugged, or, whenever you're learning like something in college. They should really try to lighten the workload, if that makes sense. I don't think the number of things that they cover is bad. I think it's mainly the workload, the things they expect you to do outside of class.
I actually, I have exactly the opposite experience. I will get to that in a second, but I do know that I do sympathize with that point, because I do remember a lot of my peers in college were suffering from a very similar problem, in that they were not having issues with the core of the assignment. Like, let's say you were writing a memory allocator. They weren't segfaulting when they were trying to jump around on the free list. They were trying to print something or send something over this wire protocol, and they got 1 byte wrong, and they were crashing on that rather than what was
some bug that's really hard to debug, but not really relevant to the project whatsoever.
Yeah. It wasn't, relevant to the core thing that they were trying to teach you. But in my experience, and again, I know I'm coming from a very different, somewhat privileged place here, I actually do remember that I do remember that a lot of the time, I feel like I was almost given a little bit too much by the TAs, just because I would wind up having to, I guess, as soon as I got their code, I would usually wind up having to do some kind of renovation to it, just to make it a little bit more, I guess, adaptable to expansion, or there might be some kind of issue with it. Like, I remember one time we had this project that was somewhat performance sensitive, and the TA's code was passing this enormous struct by value, I think order of n squared times, and it was causing the entire program to just crawl, because all it was doing was copying memory. And I remember running into this, and I was like, oh my God, this is I didn't realize this was the problem yet. I was like, oh my God, this program, I'm going to need a better computer to run it. And then I eventually narrowed it down and I fixed it. And I told, all the people that were in the same class as me who I knew, like, yo, there is this big problem here. This is the TAs, their code is not good. Change this to this. It's a simple change. It'll fix your performance. And then I would look on the classes like mailing list or whatever. And that would, they'd be like, oh my God, this program is so slow. And eventually, I'd have to email the professor and they send out a revised copy. And the revised copy wasn't exactly the same as my fix. So I had to integrate that. And it always made the project just like a little bit more difficult than it actually had to be. But
oh, yeah. I mean, I agree. That's definitely a problem sometimes in projects whenever they just assume that you are going to do it the same way that they thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
So then they set up the whole environment for their solution.
Yeah, and there was also this problem where I think something was returning like denormal floats, and you had to work around that. And
yeah, there's definitely
it wouldn't have been a problem if I had written that myself, and it probably would have taken less time. But I understand that there needs to be some kind of middle ground.
Yeah, I definitely that was a problem in a couple of projects too. I get what you're saying with that. Yeah, I guess it's hard. It's a hard problem to solve. But I do think it was just too much of a workload, if I'm going to be honest. Because, I was up way too late, way too many nights. Mm-hmm. And while that's expected in college, it shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of comes down to, again, I definitely feel like I was up late a lot in college, but a lot of it was of my own volition because I was doing other stuff, other productive stuff. I wasn't out partying. But I think it almost kind of has to be that way in the current situation that people find themselves in with regards to the financial stress that college puts upon you. And I'm sure there's somebody who is listening to this from Germany and laughing their ass off right now. But with the amount of, I guess, time and money and opportunity costs that you need to, I can look into the analytics later and see if the one viewer is German, if you'd like.
Okay.
Sorry. But with the situation where you have to dump an enormous amount of your life into this already and you are paying for the privilege to do so, I almost feel like it would be irresponsible not to shove it at you at a breakneck rate.
I understand the sentiment. However, I would like to say, no, that does not make any sense.
Well, I guess you kind of do have the ability to, slow yourself down a little bit just by taking less courses. But then you run into the problems of are you a full-time student, which does not.
Yeah,
I feel like that whole kind of classification is just very ableist, in my opinion.
That, because then you got to start paying per credit, or other schools probably have some other system. But anyway, it gets expensive if you try to do that.
And your eligibility for certain types of housing and financial aid and food assistance and all of that kind of stuff, being dependent on that is just horrific, frankly.
It's a terrible system in general. I think they really, at least with CompSci, I think the professors were kind of trash. There was a weird mixed bag of professors.
I think that kind of just applies for every major. You have the professors that you absolutely love, and then there's the people who either the way they think doesn't gel with the way that you think, or maybe...
I mean, they were just socially awkward. Some of them were just really socially awkward, and it made it so hard to even just communicate with them about just basic stuff.
I kind of feel like a lot of that melts away when you really start to get into the heady stuff. I feel like the main problem with me, again, I think I have a very different experience, is with the TAs who are often much more personable, but they also didn't know what they were talking about some of the time, or they would give you an inaccurate answer that you might have to call out to get the right answer. Might not be to any fault of their own. They might have just, messed up or something.
They're just students, yeah. Yeah, I definitely had a couple times whenever I was like, oh my gosh, and I went to help for I went to go get help from a TA, and then they gave me the wrong answer, and then that threw me and even more because you expect their answer to be right. You know what I'm saying? And then you're just and then you eventually figure out, no, they were just giving me the wrong info. Yeah, TA,
and you wind up having to either go back and prove yourself right or debate them in their office for 20 minutes while everybody's looking at you.
Yeah.
Is there a good way to improve that, though? Because, again, I think just with the economics of the whole thing, is there a better way?
It's really hard for me to think of a solution to such a complicated problem off the spot. There's got to be a better way, though. I really do think they just give too much work, if I'm going to be honest. Because when you think about it, most of my homework came from computer science. I get that my major was computer science, but like even then, like, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't even like my tougher math courses that were like giving out as much homework as comp sci classes, you know? So I really do think the comp sci department was just giving out a lot more homework than all of the other classes.
Mm-hmm. Again, very different experience. I found that the comp sci homework was, with the exception of one class, was always a little bit lighter than all the rest of the stuff. And I remember just really agonizing over the upper level math stuff, like the stuff that you had to write proofs for.
It was hard, but I don't think it was as time consuming, if that makes sense. Like, well, it was time consuming, but that's just because I'm an idiot and it took me so long to like figure it out. However, the comp sci stuff is just time consuming in general. Like, it takes time to write the code and debug it and do all that stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Where like, even if I was smarter, or like, I don't think that would have made the writing, you know, you make the projects faster, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I can kind of empathize on that point. The big thing though is that I just remember a lot of it was just gathering requirements and that kind of stuff, and just kind of emailing back and forth with people to make sure that this is what you want in this case where the program or where the problem is just underspecified and you don't actually tell us what should happen in the case where this is X and this is Y, because there's two things that could potentially be construed as correct. And
yeah, they really do. When it's open-ended, they really do fail to mention like just some basic necessary things. It's like, I know it's open-ended, like I know that there's a bunch of different solutions possible, but this has nothing to do with that. You just didn't specify what output you were looking for. Like, you know, it's just junk like that. And then you're like, oh my God.
yeah, although to bring that back, this is kind of what you have to do in the real world too. You need to speak with people and figure out, okay, does this button actually need to look like this? And what happens when the user hovers over it?
But
Maybe that was helpful.
I mean, no, I don't think so. It's not supposed to be the real world. It's where they teach you the skills. It's not the same. I don't think schools should be like the real world, if that makes sense. Like, you know, like your training environment should not be a one-to-one, because then you might as well just immediately go into the workforce.
I don't think the traditional schooling model would really even work in that kind of a integrated environment, just because there's so many more moving parts and actual people that you need to interact with to appropriately simulate the workplace environment, which cannot be, I think, economically feasibly emulated in an academic environment. Yeah. Like, imagine having 12 different people that you need to talk to individually to do a class, and they all presumably would have to be of the grade of a very experienced TA or greater.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Like, you know, you would have your product manager and, you know, the guy on the business side who's the domain expert and designer and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess the conclusion that we've come to is that school is still a good way to go if you're getting into software. And I wish it was more accessible to everybody, frankly. But
the
current way it is that it's difficult to replace.
Yeah, I think just as things are getting more technical, you do need more education. And I think people really try to fight with that. But like, if you look in the past, people used to go to school maybe up to like, you know, something like ninth grade or something like that. But nowadays, it's expected that you at least get a high school education. And soon it's becoming that you need a college education. And I think that trend will only continue as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think the way that colleges educate you now, frankly, is actually quite good, especially with the math focus, because everything goes back to math. And I think that a lot of people who aim to discount that are perhaps not appreciating the full picture, or may be, I guess, fallaciously inclined to not think about it that way. But the math is just so immensely helpful. Philosophical ideas are also useful. And I mean, obviously, the more you know, the more you're going to be able to apply when you're solving a problem. And that goes for any problem. You can apply your knowledge of linguistics in programming all the time.
Oh, yeah. Everything's connected.
The EFF published an article this week about a W3 proposal by Google called FLoC, FLoC. And it is this proposal for a web standard that provides, in its current form, this JavaScript API that lets you get a somewhat unique tracking ID for every browser that is based on again, at least in its current stage of proposal, they say this is very early, based on your browsing habits. So effectively, it is a number or some kind of identifier that represents effectively your last week of browsing history. And any site can access that and send it up. I don't believe that it is currently protected in any way. I'm sure that they're going to do something about that in some way. Very early stages, obviously, but this is interesting because it kind of is billed as a replacement for the third-party tracking cookie. But there's a lot of concerns by privacy advocates that this is going to just be another way for predatory people to target people based on things that they may not necessarily want to be targeted on.
That doesn't sound good for anyone involved. It doesn't sound like it's what the advertisers want, because they just want as much data as they can. It doesn't sound like it's good for the people who are like using it, because they don't want that information out there anyway. Like, I don't get who this is for. Like, why would anyone want this?
Yeah, so obviously, if you are a person who is listening to this, or if you are one of us and you have 600 browser extensions that are dedicated to blocking every single possible thing on the web that could be used to track or fingerprint you, this doesn't matter, because in Firefox, that JavaScript API is just going to return 0 or a random number, and you're not going to be affected by this. However, most of the world is not using Firefox, or presumably Apple might not implement it in Safari. Who knows? Obviously, Chrome will, because Google proposed the standard. So if it gets accepted, or even if it doesn't, honestly.
Hey, hold on there. Google's big enough that I'm sure there's tons of infighting between the different groups at Google.
Their advertising, however, their advertising department, I'm sure, is a very big fish in that pond, though, because that's where a lot of their money comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
If their advertising department wants something, the advertisement department, I'm assuming, is going to get that thing.
Oh, yeah. If they push hard enough, I'm absolutely sure that's true.
Yeah, you don't starve your golden goose. So this is proposed to be a replacement for a lot of invasive tracking measures that people are currently not very happy about, obviously, but are currently in place, like third-party cookies, like browser fingerprinting. However, from a privacy standpoint, and again, this is for people who are not power users, because power users are not going to be affected by this because they are going to run Firefox and the extension that blocks this, presumably. This is something that could be further used to fingerprint you and to track you based on demographics that, frankly, you should not be allowed to be tracked by. Like, for example, they propose that you are not going to be able to be tracked based on certain things like, past personal experiences that may be what we consider to be over the line. Like, for example, health issues, mental health issues, socioeconomic status to an extent, stuff like that. But your browsing history is very reflective of that, I feel. And the way that they're proposing to do this is your user agent is running like a set similarity algorithm on your browsing history and presumably this large matrix of browsing histories that it is given. There might be as many as, I think they're currently suggesting 256 like potential cohorts that you could be put into.
Oh, so it's like an encoder decoder kind of thing.
It's kind of like representing your browsing history I guess I didn't cover this very well, but effectively that ID is going to be one of, say, 256 is their current proposal. The number, again, is up in the air. It could be as many as 1 million when it launches. I don't know.
I'm sure it'll literally just be a 64-bit number. Well,
the idea is that you're going to be grouped with, again, they propose at least 1,000 people, but who knows if that's going to be what actually
there's no way they
happens.
could guarantee that your browsing history will fall within a group of 1,000.
And then they're thinking of, some way of centralizing it so that, they can monitor if people are being grouped into too small of groups and then fixing that. It's just this
whole
mess.
System sounds much safer. Yeah, this sounds great. You're going to need a complicated, convoluted system that no one really fully understands how it works.
They're just running a set similarity algorithm based on your browsing history, right? So there might be things that they claim that they're not going to target you based on. Like, let's say Google has had a long history with payday lending corporations using targeted ads. And, this being a cat and mouse game of Google trying to block the payday lending corporations and the payday lending corporations setting up increasingly elaborate business practices full of middlemen and, stuff like that to kind of get around this. But the problem is that even if they say that they don't want to target you based off of things that, these, for example, payday lending corporations might be interested in, there's still a way to figure it out. Like, if I told you my browsing history, you could probably tell me my demographic, right? If I were to tell you that I went on Bob Dylan's website yesterday, you could probably tell me my age, right?
not a Zoomer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I went on Twitch the other day, how old am I?
Oh my gosh. If you went on Bob Dylan website and Twitch, then you're probably like in your 20s.
But
Yes.
see, the thing I want to talk about is I don't see how this system prevents them from doing the other systems on top of this. Like, this doesn't prevent fingerprinting at all. Like, this in no way seems like it hides your fingerprint, because your
and as a matter of fact, it gives you
done by like browsing history. Like, you know what I'm saying?
It's actually even worse for fingerprinting because, again, they say that this is part of some fingerprinting budget, right? That they're going to, maybe pull back the reins on something else before this is implemented so that it's not as bad. But right now, they're proposing it. It's presumably getting rolled out in a future update of Chrome. I think that I saw in the article that it's getting rolled out, actually. It might already be rolled out, but it's coming in a new version of Chrome, presumably for some small swathe of users in an A/B test. And that gives you another, as it currently stands, 8 bytes of entropy to discriminate based on browsers. So if you were running Chrome on Windows and you had a weird font installed that maybe 20,000 people had, you were in a cohort of 20,000 people when you were trying to be fingerprinted. Now you might be in a cohort of 20.
Or even just screen resolution size. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's so many things you can use to fingerprint browsers. User agent strings, installed fonts, screen resolutions, WebGL characteristics. This is just another thing.
Yeah, it'll take their fingerprinting down from like oh my god, even like they said, a group of 1,000 at minimum. Like, if you give one other variable, like that could narrow down to like 20, maybe like 2 or something like that, and then 2 variables, and you're almost certainly down to just one person.
Yeah, this is not good in my opinion.
I don't see who thought of this, who approved it. Like, I don't know who this is for. Who wants this? Who's like, yeah.
Well, I think the main exigence of this is that Google realizes that browsers and the general public is becoming increasingly hostile, at least among the more tech savvy people. Obviously, some people don't care, but about tracking, right? Browsers are becoming more hostile about tracking, and the tech-savvy people who are hostile about tracking are also controlling, to an extent, what the general public consumes. Like, if you used Firefox back in the mid-2000s and you never bothered to switch to Chrome when that was a big thing, you're still protected, for the most part.
Yeah. I think it's not that most people don't care, it's that they can't care, because they don't have enough knowledge to, do something like download Linux. Most people don't even know how to, download a new browser or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, downloading Firefox is going to protect you from a lot of that stuff, and what I'm saying is
most people don't have the technical know-how. If you're over it, some people don't even know how to turn their computer on, much less download a new browser and set that up.
Okay, well, let's say the audience of most people who are maybe above 15 and under 30, right? That's a pretty big demographic of people.
Yeah.
How many of them do you think are using Chrome?
The majority.
Yeah. And how many of them do you think would be comfortable if I said, go to the App Store and download Firefox on your phone? How many people would know what to do?
Oh, no, I get weird looks. Oh, my God. Yeah, they do know how to do that, but I do get weird looks for that.
Yeah, precisely. Again, this is just another one of those things that is going to even further stratify the haves and the have-nots in terms of technical knowledge, I feel. And this is to what end? Targeted advertising?
It's weird that so much online budgets are made through online advertising.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like at this point, people are just exchanging, different advertisers are just exchanging dollar bills. There's not even a product. It's just somebody selling ads and then using that money to buy ads, to then sell to other people for ads. It's just weird. Anyway.
I do feel kind of glad in the sense that I know that this is something that is probably going to be easier to block than third-party cookies, but that's my only solace.
Especially because it's a new standard, so a lot of people won't even care about it right now.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
Give it 30 years, and once it's fully incorporated, then you literally won't be able to visit a website unless you actually give a valid tracking number.
All right, we had some great discussions today, Miles. Always a pleasure to speak with you. I will catch you later.
Is it though? Is it really? Yeah, I'll see you later.
And that's the show. Thanks to Meydän, that's Meyda with an umlaut N, for their track The Beauty of Maths, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license, which serves as our intro, outro, and interlude music. You can find more in the description of this episode. Please remember that the opinions expressed in this production may not reflect those of other participants on the show, or those of any participants' past, current, or future employers. They're also probably exaggerated a bit for comedy's sake. Anyway, thanks for tuning in.